beginning useful things with D3 and JavaScript that you would need your homework to, if that's okay with everyone. Did anyone have a question for homework on that? Besides the opening? No? Okay, so is anyone familiar with D3 in JavaScript already?
No, after you gave us the tutorials online.
Yeah, so we'll start from the beginning here. So we made an observable, and Kieran, I believe, posted it on the
Yes, so on the Slack announcement channel, everyone must have a link to this observable notebook. It's basically like a web-based JavaScript playground where you could just, if anyone has used Python and Jupyter notebooks, it's kind of similar, not exactly, but you will use this notebooks for the lab, and you can pretty much take this code and like, put it in a JavaScript file and run it on your local machine if you want. But this is useful for editing online. And if you want to save this notebook, these notebooks are on my account. So if you make any changes, you can't save it. If you want, you could just on the top right there must be option called full. You can use that and create your own copies, and you just play around with this.
Yeah, you can make your own and add stuff to it and play around with it to get an idea. So we have a little block we made here. We have some inline styling, or not inline, but in the file style. And we've just created 4 little sample rectangles here. And for those of you that are not familiar with selections, we wanted to start with D3 selections because you are going to be using that for the homework and homework 2. So if I uncomment this out, we can run each cell one at a time, just similar to Jupyter Notebooks, but we can target things that are in above cells otherwise. So, does everyone have their observable open right now? Anyone that wants to? Okay, so 2 major things that we need to talk about is select versus select all. And instead of explaining it in detail, it's also good to just see it. So D3 select.
Sorry. Yeah, I think the notebook was changed. If you want to read it. So what? I think the notebook was changed. At least I'm not seeing that those gray boxes.
Do you see red boxes?
I see red boxes.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so it just basically you have the final version of the notebook, like when it runs. So Jen uncommented these code. Once that code runs, you will see everything that we added.
Yeah, so when, if you want to go back to the gray boxes, you can go up to this box here and just rerun it.
This one and the one below it.
Yeah. So, okay, so for data binding,
Can you speak a bit louder for the camera?
yeah, so for data binding, you're going to need to select elements, which D3 to begin with. So D3 select will select the first element within that block scope, right?
Yes.
The first element within the block scope that you're in. So if you do D3 select example 1, so we're selecting by an ID, and then D3 select, or I guess from that selection, we then select a rectangle with SVG select rect. It's just going to select one of them. So we'll run that. You can see that. Okay. So it's selecting the first rectangle. If we do D3 select all, and comment this, it's going to select all of the rectangles in this scope. So we can manipulate that. So when you're working with data binding, it's just important to remember that there's a difference between D3 select and D3 select all. Most of the time you want to use D3 select all. I use D3 select when I'm selecting something with an ID because I'm just going to do one of them. Or if I know that I just have one of whatever element I'm selecting. Otherwise, it will just select one of them. So when we're selecting SVG, this will be a little more applicable farther down the line in the examples, but when we're selecting, we'll select our SVG, and then we're going to select all of the rectangles that don't exist yet. This will make a little more sense later. But we're selecting imaginary rectangles. We want to use D3 select all before we bind the data to them and then create them. If that makes sense.
Can you zoom in a little bit?
Yeah. And you can also, if you go to the observable, you can go in and change things around. You won't be able to save it because it's here as observable here.
If you create a code, then you can save it and you can use it here.
Yeah. So then, what I was talking about before is, so we want to select these elements so we can bind data to them. And we can do that by being able to sample data. And we're creating 4 circles. And what we're doing is we're going to select our SVG, for example 2, which is right here. And we want to select all of the circles that don't exist yet. And we're binding our data right to them. And well, I guess we can go through. There is a new way to do this, which is a little more simple, but it's important to understand this enter, exit, merge pattern. And you basically just memorize this by doing it over and over again. But what you need to do is kind of, I guess I would call it a central thing for D3, for data binding, is that you have this selection where you select all of the circles in the set, you bind data to them, and then you don't have to, but it can cause problems down the line. You create an enter selection. So then you go selection.enter, and then from the enter selection, you're actually creating the circles. And feel free to fill in if I'm missing something. But this doesn't make much sense if you're not updating. But when you're updating, so basically you create these circles. You have 4 circles and you're like, okay, well, I want to change the color of them. So instead of removing all the circles or deleting all of the circles, you can change the data and you can run an update on this selection that changes this circle selection accordingly, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling right now. But this circles exit remove is important because it removes all of the circles that are not in your updated data. So it's a little weird, but you're gonna have to bear with me and it'll make more sense when you're actually doing it. So you're selecting all of the imaginary circles that don't exist. You're binding the data to it. And then you're entering this selection of your circles that don't exist yet, and you're appending the circles. So now that you're actually there, all of the old data that's no longer in our updated data will be removed with this. And then we're taking our enter selection of whatever new circles, and we're merging them with our regular circles. And then we add styling to them. Now that our circles that exist, they're updated, and they're there, we can add styling to them. And generally, you memorize this pattern, and you learn it and make the connections when things go wrong. So I'm wondering if it would be beneficial to actually have them do something instead of me just talking at you. If you have your observable, we can go in and we can add one of these in. Add another one. We're going to change this to brown. Okay, so we've run this already. Now we have updated data. It runs this code block before it because I'm assuming observable runs all of the code. And it creates a new circle. Okay, so let's try taking something out. This is where our exit remove is going to make more sense. So we've just taken out an element. And I wish there was a way that we had like a debugging mode where you can see where everything executes, but let's try and just comment this out. And then we're going to remove another circle. found was interesting.
Yeah,
Here.
run the next cell.
Say what?
Don't you have to run the next cell to
No, it
exit
should
remove?
execute for some reason.
Oh, you commented out exit remove.
Yeah, that was the point, is that it wasn't supposed to actually get rid of these circles, but it did change the other circle green, which was interesting. Okay, so I took out exit remove.
That's because there's two green
That was
circles.
the third one, and then the last one was the one that did get removed.
Yes. I was like, wait a second, why did it change that one?
You can just run this cell and this cell again because the way it works. Just start with the clear SVG and then run your JavaScript again.
Yeah, but so while you were, so I took out exit remove to show what would happen then it doesn't remove the empty selection. I took out the third element. I was like, why did the third element update? And it's because it didn't change the fourth element. Because it wasn't the fourth element. Anyway, out of brain space. But okay, so does that make sense to everyone? Should we try like another one? Do you guys want to try one on your own? Make a suggestion.
So what happens if we want to bind both text and a circle to in the group, and we want to move that around? It's like right now we're binding it directly to a circle. What if we want to bind it to a group that has two child elements?
Yeah, we can do that.
It doesn't matter. You can bind data to anything. So if you bind your data to a group, and then the data is bound to that group. So anything you add inside the group, it doesn't matter. If you move that data around, if you change the data, group and its contents will be updated. So you don't have to worry about binding something. Once you have bound something to a group or a higher level element, you don't have to worry about binding it to a lower level element again. It just passes on everything.
Yes, I mean, a lot of times when I'm working with stuff, I'll have a group and I'll bind the data to the group and then I'll append a circle.
Oh, okay, so you append a circle to the group and you also append the text, and then you can move that as around.
Yeah, so you could create this whole like enter exit update merge, and then you can append from this data that's bound to the group, you can then append a circle and then color it based on the data that is bound to the group, if that makes sense. Then you could append a text as well. And then you can like transform, do whatever accordingly to the group, if that makes sense. And you do that too, you create a group for everything, don't you?
Yeah.
I find it like a little easier as far as manipulating the data.
You mean have like a mega group that has everything in it? So
I have like nested groups a lot of times. So if I'm creating a chart, I'll have like a large initial group that will have certain things into it, and then that way when you transform, you can transform relative to the initial transform of a group, if that makes sense. You could like move it to the center, and then you're like, okay, well, then I want to have a bar, and I want to then move that. You can transform it from the outer group's position, if that makes sense. But that's a little getting into things that we don't really have to go over right now. Okay, so
Sorry, on that last one, you did a D3 select. Could you do a D3 select all in that case? Would that be the same?
So you do the
which case? Can you scroll up?
Yeah. So up at the top, did you D3 select example 2?
that's an ID, you should only have one.
yeah, and so
So technically you can do a D3 select all because there is only one example too. So it would just still return one element, right? So it shouldn't really matter. If, however, let's say we did a D3 select all and there were multiple SVGs, all of the code down below would be applied to all of the SVGs. So instead of seeing 4 circles, you would see 4 circles in multiple SVGs. But usually, since we have one, if you have one SVG and if you're going to use an ID based selection, it's a good idea to use a D3 select so you know that there is only going to be one selection always.
I generally only use select if I'm selecting like one div. I know it's one div or one SVG, and then I use select all. I mean for everything else. Yeah, you always. I mean, I can't.
Sorry, so if it's uninitialized, just do select. So in this case, nothing's been initialized.
So actually, it's kind of weird to
But if by uninitialized, do you mean if there is no DOM element present? Then you cannot use a select. Because right now, if you see in the above cell, there is a SVG with height 400, width 800, and an ID called example2. Hence, the d3.select example2 work.
Yeah,
If
so
there was no DOM element, a select doesn't work. It doesn't return anything.
So for homework 2, should we create, like pre-create an SVG element in the HTML file, or should we just append the new SVG to the body?
Depends on you. Like usually for my SVG elements, I create them in an HTML file and then change their size from JavaScript if I need to. But it's good to have one element present in your HTML, which you can then select directly.
So it's better to go the HTML route than like start with like completely blank HTML document and
mean-
start appending everything to it.
Well, by completely blank, I mean in the base case you will at least have a body tag, right?
Yeah.
You could do a d3.select body, then append SVG, sure, but that's writing a lot more code than you need to. Because your single SVG is not related to your data. Like, my rule is use D3 if anything on your screen is going to be changed according to your data. Otherwise, just write HTML.
So, and that, yeah, it depends on personal preference. Sometimes I'll make like a skeleton of just divs. I don't think I've ever just put in an SVG tag, but it's not wrong.
Well, from the homework prop, it almost sounds like you want us to start with like nothing and then add everything.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the homework as well. I feel like the farther you go down, the more freedom you have to fill in the homework. Okay, so does that whole thing make sense to everyone? Because the next thing is that you get to try it out in your own observable thing right here, block. I guess you call it blocks. Give everyone a couple minutes.
Yeah, like probably let's take 5 to 6 minutes just so you can try something out. Solution.
Yeah, that's true.
This is what I was talking about. Jen.
Yeah, here you can write your own SVG.
So I started from we'll grab the body and then we'll just drop an SVG on it.
Yeah, and so I have to look at that again because it's been like a week since I've actually looked at the template. But yeah, you should just append an SVG because, yeah, does that make sense?
So it's okay to append an SVG, right, and put the SVG in there?
Yeah, what do you mean?
Because in the HTML file, it's pretty much just blank besides the title and name.
Yeah.
So I just told the JavaScript, give me a new SVG below
Yeah,
it.
definitely, and that's totally fine.
Instead of putting an SVG there and then grabbing that SVG and start.
Yeah, and it's honestly like personal preference.
According to the assignment prompt, which one should we be doing?
Well,
Or does it
so
matter?
there's none there. So you're not gonna get docked.
Well, it says the first step is to append an SVG element to the body of your page.
Okay, then do that then. I mean, it's a very like.
Because when I read that, I was like, what? Are we starting? Are we just like, you just give us a blank HTML document? You want us to just start like?
Yeah, like.
Are we just programming HTML in JavaScript then? Using D3?
Kind of, not. I feel like it's one of those things where, is it necessary to do with D3? No, but.
We'll just do it anyways.
So.
It never says we have to use select and we have to bind data to it.
No, you. It might say that you have to use D3. Double check, but.
Yeah, we have to use D3, but.
So they haven't.
Yes. Looks like it's not charging. Is that right?
It is charging.
You sure?
Isn't it?
It says you're low. Okay.
So select all the data and then select exit. Selection to that. So yeah, so we're making you do it a little longer than you tend to because there's those situations where there's lots of people trying to talk through this.
Started talking with this. There was.
So if you're not enough at all, you could just use self-tradition one. So let's say like you could still select all of it. But you would have to do. So, but if you were to do on that function that you have the data binding, it would just creating more. Yes, if you don't use this, you won't use that pattern. If you're just appending articles, because basically this idea of this is that is a way
So for all of, for every time we need to have enter, exit, merge, or no.
Yes.
So
I
that's,
mean, if you are binding your data to your DOM elements, you need to have an enter, exit, merge, and update cycle.
Don't
So,
use join.
sorry, or you could just use join.
And whatever.
It depends, right? If you're going
I'm
with
gonna learn
the,
as few things as possible to get this homework done, so.
sorry, yeah.
If you use
Yeah.
join, then you don't have to learn. You learn one thing instead of three
Well,
things.
problem is in your future homeworks, there will be places where join won't work because you have
Yes.
to do something more
So I'd
complicated.
rather, yes.
It's like this.
Enter.
Sorry.
We should know enter enter now. And if there's
Yes,
more
like-
stuff on the page, that's gonna be fixed.
Well,
Or if you're updating, sorry.
not necessarily. Problem is, so basically enter, exit, update and merge are kind of you define scenarios for future, right? So
Yeah.
it might happen if you don't define anything for exit
Then
and
that would be a problem.
there will be a problem if your app has some like interactions which change the data, then excess data will not be removed.
Right, okay. So we should always define those,
Yes.
and then the circles, the attribute like right there, that's like what it would be after we
Yes.
update it.
After you
Yeah.
update. Yep.
Okay,
When we draw the lines that's bound to data, what about the root node? There's no line leading from the root node from the animal node.
So we allow a little creativity with that, but you have lines that are extending from all of your leaves.
Oh, your child nodes to their parents, right?
Yes.
What about the one at the very, very end, the root node, that has no parent?
I know it doesn't.
So is there a way to say just don't draw any element, or?
You could write your code that way. You could have an if statement somewhere which says if this is a root node, don't draw anything. I mean, we didn't in class, so we shouldn't this time.
If you're familiar with filtering, you can also use that.
You can filter with V3?
You can filter a selection. So yeah, I guess that would be.
Oh, this is the problem is our data binding, right?
Yeah.
So somehow we need to like bind it for the lines, but not bind it for, not bind it for the lines, but bind it for everything else.
So if you were to go through a pattern, let's say you bind data to the groups, and so you have these groups.
Can we do questions written over at the end so that we finish one third tutorial?
Yeah, let's table that, and then at the end we can talk about like a game plan coming up with a game plan for that.
Yeah, the first time I did it, rather than binding data to the elements, I just said, well, why don't I just iterate through all the elements, just draw the element, and draw it.
But there's a way to do it if you're not using D3.
Well, I used D3 to draw the elements, but I didn't use D3 to select them or bind the data to it.
And then you can.
I mean, if you want to get really complicated with it, you can create a new data structure based off
And
of
then
Because then in that case, you could just say, if I'm at the root node, just skip it and then don't draw anything.
Yeah.
Like don't draw that extra line.
Yeah, and you could do that. I mean, there's multiple ways. Like, there's multiple ways to solve like a given problem with like D3, or you like throw jobs.
So is that so is there like a specification that we have to use select and we have to find the data, or can we just iterate through the data and just draw the elements?
I'm going to read the instructions and get back to you on that one, but
Yeah, the instructions don't say that's the
if
problem.
they don't say D3, then
Well, it says we have to use D3, but it didn't say we have to use D3 selection.
I'm unsure how you would select something and append something.
So I just add a tree, and then I just zip through the data, and I just start appending the lines, and then appended the circles and groups and text. And I just never have to worry about calling update, merge, or enter.
And save that in the refuge. And then
I mean,
I do the for each.
this is yours.
For each of the nodes in the list of nodes.
and for this, because you're not updating it, you can do that. But in future homework,
So it's okay for this homework, but not okay for future homework.
yeah, I would say
Merge
yes.
is basically when you.
Do you have a question?
I think I might have to explain that to board because it's another problem.
Yeah, okay, so. Okay, so it's actually
You select your div, and then you append to your div.
yeah,
You don't have data, you don't need to enter
and
append.
then it's something that you never created an
We could just do the solution.
Just
So,
Yeah, that's true.
what I'm thinking is, should I just do a D3 selection kind of explanation on the board once?
with those attributes. That might be good.
Yeah, so I just do that.
That you're creating right now with the append.
Can you just turn the camera on this board? One minute.
Basically, that append, like, whatever you have in the append, it creates.
Yes. Enter is from data in. Append is when you create new objects inside your DOM.
So it's not, okay. Okay, so it's not moving something, it's actually.
The enter and exit moves the data. The enter and
Data, and then that's how
Sorry,
you
can I
enter and merge.
So this would actually
Exit that.
I just keep this.
Okay.
There is a nice visual of it somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, so I will just go through this D3, like is everyone comfortable with D3 selections or select all, or should I go through it on the board once? So I think if you have questions like after this, then probably we should discuss it on one-on-one, but usually how D3 selections work is, first you do a select all statement and select some things. Now, select something and let's say you're selecting something with IDs. Well, these are not HTML IDs, like just selecting something with this reference pointer, and then you assign it to some data. This data usually is an array. Now, the things you have selected here may or may not exist in your DOM. So let's say we have a data array with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And right now our SVG DOM has 2 circles, and I say select all circles and assign this data. Now so the way to do this is first I do select all circle.data, and then I pass in this array to this data function, and I get something in return. So let's call this selections. Now, how does the selections object look? So right now the selections object is actually made up of 3 different lists. The first is called an enter list, second is called an update list, and the third is called an exit list. And what are these 3 different lists? So enter are all the elements which are not present in the DOM but present in our data. Update are the elements which are present in the DOM as well as our data, and exit are the elements which are present on the DOM but not present in the data. So enter would be just our data, update would be DOM plus data, and exit would just be DOM. So if something is present in our data but not in the DOM, we need to draw it. That's why we call it an enter selection. These are the elements which are going to enter in the DOM. Update is updated elements are which are there in the DOM as well as the data, but they might need to be updated because data might have changed in some ways. And exit are elements which are in the DOM but not in the data, and they need to be removed right now. So the first thing you do is, since we know exit are the extra elements, we just say exit.remove and we just remove this element. You can technically do this step anywhere, like in the beginning or at the end, doesn't matter. These elements are going to be removed from the data. Next step we do is, if there are any elements which are present in the data but not on our DOM, we need to do an enter and append. So we do an enter, we append, and we append whatever elements. If we did a select or circle, we should ideally append a circle here. And what we do after this next step is, usually this is our selections object, and what we say is, you can see in this step, what we are doing here is, when we do this enter.append circle, we store this somewhere into let's say we store it in a variable called es enter selection. The next step we do is enter selection dot merge, and then we pass in our original selections variable. And this original selections variable is the same as our update. So basically, instead of just to save on the time, just to save some writing code, this update is by default assigned to the selections variable. Therefore, we could just say enter selection.merge selection. So now the new selections object is a combination of all our newly entered elements as well as the old elements which are still associated with the data, but not the exit element. So any visual rendering or any new attributes we want to assign to, we assign to the results of this merge instead of enter or update separately. Because if we assign it to enter or update separately for this step, we would have to use attributes or update the attributes twice, once for enter and once for update. Hence we use a merge to combine these two lists and then just do it once. So in the example we see here, first we just do a select all on a group, assign a data array to this, then we enter and append groups. The next step, we remove all the exit selections because we do not want this. And then at the third step, we do a merge. So we merge all the enter elements with our select circles, which is basically the update element, and then we store them in the circle because just to make it easy and reuse variables. And then to the finally merged list, we apply all our attributes. Anyone still have any questions about selections? This entire process will take some time to get used to.
This is the hardest part, or one of the.
I don't understand the difference between update and enter and why we need to merge.
Enter are and so basically enter includes all the elements which are not currently on the screen, but they are part of your data. So they, for example, you might have associated, let's say first you associated 1 and 2, and you ended up with this output. But now the data changed to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now 3, 4, and 5 do not have a representation on the screen, so they are part of your enter. They will be entering your data in the future. But 1 and 2 already are represented here, so they are just part of the update. This is to make sure that, for example, this is like this entire binding doesn't really work on just the values. For example, if 1.2 was changed to 1.1 and 2.2, this circle is now associated with 1.1 and this is with 2.2. Hence, it still needs to be updated because the underlying value did change. 1 was changed to 1.1, so it still needs to do some kind of update. Hence, it resides in an update cycle. And what we do is the only job of enter selection is to append new things. Once we append the new things at this step, enter and update basically have same function, hence we merge them into a single list of 5 elements instead of maintaining a separate list of 2 and 3. Does that make it a bit clearer?
So if we had 1.1 and 2.3 and then 3.5, enter will have all the 5 values.
Enter will just have these 3 values because our screen already has 2 elements, but our list has 5. So automatically these 2 elements are assigned to the first 2 values, and the rest 3 which do not have anything on screen are part of our enter.
Can we just do an update.append or something? Is there something like that?
No, you cannot do a update.append. So what happens is, if you do a update.append, it will try to append something inside this circle, because update already has a circle on the screen.
Okay.
So when you say update.append, it would assume that you want something inside the circle. That's the reason we have different selections, because enter.append on an enter works differently than a .append on an update. Usually in like good browser implementations, update.append throws an error saying you cannot append anything to a circle.
So if if there is nothing new in my array, I just want to update what has been changed. Even then you'll have to use merge.
Yes, so the thing is, like, these things are like, you don't actually, so the reason we do this is because we don't know how our data is going to change, right? Even if you know how your data is going to change, these are like different, you're basically defining 3 different scenarios, and you have to define them always. So even if your data always has 5 elements, you still need to specify what happens if your new data has 4 elements or 6 elements. So these are kind of different scenarios. If your data ends up having the same 5 elements with different values, enter and exit will never be used. Like, the code will be still present, this step will do nothing, and this exit step will do nothing, but this merge step will do something. So this is basically your planning for all different scenarios, and you always need to do them, because if not doing this is like a really, really bad practice, and your code will almost always fail.
So I just want to say update portion of it. I do understand that enter is the only data,
Yes.
data object, and coming to the merge, we are merging the DOM elements and the data elements. Right?
No, what we are doing is, for example, now enter selection was a part which was not on the screen but part of the data, right?
Right.
And update was part of both. What we are doing
is part of it.
Yes, so what we do is, here we do enter.append circle. So now, after this step, all the enter array is also present on the screen. And what happens after this step is, the circles are added somewhere here. Now what we are saying is, since both enter and update have some representation on the screen, let's merge them into one. Because now both are essentially equal, right? So merge is basically just combining these 2 lists. These 2 are basically lists, and we are just combining them with merge. You will, like, this would be more intuitive once you start using it, and then you will realize why it works the way it works. Somebody else had a question?
So during that select all, you guys specify circle. You're just saying that you want whatever we're selecting to be a circle.
Yes. So basically what we are saying is, when you say select all circle, and if there are circles on the screen, for example, let's say we said select all circle and there are already 2 circles on the screen, the 2 circles will be associated with these 2 first values automatically. If you say select all and something doesn't exist, then these 2 circles won't be connected to the data in the future.
When you guys say select all circle, there's nothing that exists, so now whatever you select is going to become a circle.
Not necessarily. Like, if there is nothing, if your select all selection selects nothing, basically everything is part of enter. So your selections in future will be whatever you append here. So the thing is, select all here can basically include anything, and your code will still work for 70% of the cases. It would have problems when your data changes. So it's always a good idea to select all, use whatever you are going to append here as part of your select all. Like I have an example in the observable which I show.
Yeah, will you show the observable? Because I don't see where we even like introduce circle in this example.
In which example?
In this update, enter, exit, merge. Like where, like at the beginning, like where do we define circle, right? 'Cause, like,
Circle is an SVG element called circle.
Yeah, so.
Like, circle is part of SVG syntax, right?
Yeah, so but I'm saying like up at the beginning, like all we define is a data array, and then we define the SVG, and then we hop into this, and we say SVG select all circle. So nothing's a circle right now, but that's making it a circle.
So it's the imaginary circle.
So you are saying like select all which are part, select all things, select all the circles. Right now, if there is nothing which is circle, all your data will be part of enter because there is nothing on the DOM called circle. If there was something on the DOM called circle, some data would be part of update cycle.
It's like reaching out. If there were circles, it would be selecting them, but now it's, I guess it's an empty selection.
So the thing is, this like select all circle here, like in the first case when your screen is blank, this select all circle is not really that important.
Okay.
It is useful when, let's say this runs a second time and now your data has changed. This select all circle, so when your data, when your code is running for the second time, there would be circles on the screen, right? Because of the first time. Because when it ran first time, it added a few circles to the screen. So when it runs the second time and says select all circle, it will select the previously drawn circles and associate them to data. So this code is usually like select all circle is more important the second time around than the first time around. And in most of your code, you will, like this cycle runs multiple times, even though you don't see it.
So what happens if the data is not bound to one element, like circle, but like two elements, group and line?
Then you will have two of these loops.
So we'll have to attach data to both selections. It doesn't have duplicate data twice.
Yes, but if you write this code twice, then it will duplicate it twice. So in that case, you will attach it to a group and put your circle and line inside that group.
Yeah, and then you have to do it all over again for line.
No, like if you, for example, here instead of select all circle, you say select all group. Here instead of append circle, you say append a group. Then all your data will be associated with these groups, and then this group can include a circle and a line which have access to this data. So it just does it once.
Yes.
But the line cannot be inside of the group.
It can.
It can.
Yes.
No, I mean, like, we have to draw the line under the group.
No, you can draw it like
Under all of the groups.
So
I mean, you can't, like, if you're talking specifically in terms of example, the homework example, then in that case, yes, you might have to draw it twice, but I think there are ways to do it once.
So if you think about, sometimes I think about the groups as a way of nesting information. So I'll have maybe an element, or like I'll have 3 elements from a data array, and in that element, I have more information. So let's say I have an array of 3 objects, and I want to create 3 squares for those. And then within each object, I have more information that I want to bind data to. Let's say I want 3 circles in each square. So I use groups as a way of passing down the data through the hierarchy, if that makes sense. Really down. So you kind of dive down into the nested data. So initially you can bind the outside data.
In the screenshot for the homework, they don't nest the line group.
Yeah, I'm just saying you have.
I mean, for the homework, it's really your choice if you want to nest lines with the groups.
But if you do that, then you run into a situation where your lines can appear over your circle.
Not necessarily. If you draw the line first and then the circle, like in this group, if you draw the line first and then the circle, then this circle will appear on top of line. But if you feel you're running into that problem, you don't need to nest them into a group. You can connect them separate. That's totally fine.
Yeah, the other thing, you don't want to nest your line group because you're going to translate the whole group as one unit.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a design decision you take when you design this visualization.
So when we use D3, do we even need to have the circles in the divs in the SVG in the first place?
Not
Not
initially.
initially, right? So
Yes.
you can just you can just append them
Yes.
with the data.
That's the way usually we do things. We have generally we just have a SVG with nothing else, and then we use D3 to append everything else. Because your circles are dependent on your data, right?
Right. So
we
there's
use
no
D3.
point of having
Yep.
them in the first place.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So but there's the screenshot on the. Oh, I guess
That's
that's like
after
us.
the drawing.
That's like in the inspect. Okay,
Yeah.
and in the inspect
It's
in
kind
the
of-
browser. Okay.
Yeah.
That
Yes,
makes
I
sense.
mean once this code runs,
Yes, I understand.
your circles get to your circles become part of your DOM. They're
Right.
inserted by your code.
Yeah, basically this is writing HTML for me.
This is writing HTML for you,
Yeah.
and the reason we do it this way is because then it calculates the smaller values of your HTML,
Yes,
the
I
X and Y
understand.
position.
Like that. Thank you.
It's kind of weird. Like I feel like this is the
Yeah.
hardest part of D3.
It's like it doesn't exist. How are we selecting?
I like explains in like there.
I think we should try to.
Yeah.
Can you just quickly run through the solution and
Well,
then?
so the solution is me going to just go like here as a group. If that makes sense. So just kind of like there's no like.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Should I do with groups? Is that without?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna try it out.
Yes, please.
So what's the first thing we need to do? We need to select our div. I'm just gonna do it all through here.
So I can put the initialization. I got lost on
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean,
You need a close quote.
You're missing a quote. Yeah.
After.
make sure.
Oh, thank you. I was like, observable doesn't like auto like finish things for me like it does. So I'm like, okay, so we've selected our div that already exists. We want to make it SVG because we can't append circles. That's another good thing to know. So you can only append SVG elements to the SVG. You can't append circles to a div. So we need to create the SVG first. So
that we can do with append or in HTML.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But the summer prompt sounds like you want us to do it in JavaScript.
I mean, as long as it
Not
works.
really, like in your homework assignment, you can change the .html file, add SVG to the menu.
Let's do groups. So what I'm doing now is I've selected the div, I've appended an SVG to our div that already exists, and now I'm going to select groups that don't exist yet, and I'm going to do the initial data bind. So select all, because you always want to use select all, because we have more than one group.
Not data.
Oh yeah, sorry. And then what is this called? Your data array.
Array.
So we bound it. We do our enter selection.
Group center. Exit area.
And then we want to merge.
Groups not merged.
Okay. So
Does it matter which way you merge? Like, you just do groups.merge?
it does matter. Yeah. So you want to, yeah.
So you wouldn't be doing groups.merge, group enter, you'd be doing groups enter.merge groups instead.
Because you want to be merging.
And it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah.
You want to enter to, like, the resultant error would be the same, right?
I guess that makes sense. I always use it the same way every time.
Yeah, it's a good idea to use the same way every time because you have to remember it at some point. Like,
Yeah.
this is more of a mechanical remembering work than actual logic.
So the operations are kind of associated, you can just flip them around. And,
Yes, I mean, you're basically combining two dishes, so it doesn't matter.
okay.
So you do. But you do want groups in the end.
Yeah.
Okay. So, our groups.
We're mutating. Professor Flat would be so mad at us.
Say what?
Professor Flat would be so mad at us for doing all these mutations.
So much changing.
Okay. Does that make sense to everyone?
That isn't Professor Flat way where everything's a constant.
When are we implementing circles now?
Okay, cool. So now that we have, okay, and generally, at least what I do, okay. So when I create new,
These are, I mean, here I would suggest you do append circles on the, after the merge because you're, sorry?
And if you do that,
Except for
then
remove the node, which will remove other circles inside it, right?
or if you append after you reach the groups, then you could end up with two circles.
Yeah, I mean, there are
and
two
some-
ways to do this. Like if you append the circle, you can append the circle now because since our higher level enter is just appending a group. You have two options. You can either append your circle before the merge, or you can append your circle after the merge because our higher level data element was a group.
so, another thing to remember is that circles have required attributes for them to show up. And that would be a radius, which is R, CY, and CX.
Well, you don't need CY and CX. By default, it's 0, 0, so it would be without that.
Yeah, they have default values, so you don't.
They have, the instruction said when you append the SVG, they give it an ID and dimensions. How would you do that?
Okay, so,
That adder.
The line below it.
does anyone?
Yeah. Dot attribute and then
Where is it?
in quotes ID, right?
Yeah.
Comma, and then again in quotes. And I think you need the. Oh, do you need? Can you just write the name of the ID?
Yeah. Yeah, we can make it whatever we want. What should we do? Or do I have it?
Question
So-
No, that's
is, do we
the-
need it? Like, do we need ID at this point? The only purpose of ID was to select something, right? But in the previous step, we already have selected the SVG when we appended. So we technically do not need ID at this stage.
Just extra practice. Okay. Does that make sense, everyone? And this is how we would change the styling for our circles.
Oh, sorry, how do you make that size specification also? And SVG element size 604.
So, since we took the extra trouble to giving it an ID, we could have styling for that, or we could do this.
Would WH work for the hyphen with attribute or no?
H?
Yeah. For, do you have to type in?
Yes.
Okay.
because those are like basically dot attr what. Like these are the things that will in your HTML they will appear in your Angular bracket. So it should be exactly the way it looks in the final.
So I noticed on some of that D3 stuff, we don't necessarily have to do that SVG each time. We can just do .attr.
Yes. Can you scroll to the solution? If Jen did not use this semicolons, then she doesn't have to use SVG. She could do attr dot another attr and keep changing it as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we need a radius. You want to fill. We'll be quick so you can show the cool point example.
The radius and maybe the CX. That's it. Your problem. Did you use
I keep running it, like rerunning it over again.
no? Just run your tool.
And then, so I'm rerunning it, it's just.
Yeah, so you can just run this again to clear out all these things. And then just run this once. That's because you don't have radius. The circle size is your radius.
I was like, wait a second.
First run the HTML.
Oh, there we are.
What are they?
Just add a CY and bring them to the bottom. Put a CY probably 200. 200 should be good.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I was doing it by index.
Just do 10.
If you do CY by index, it will appear as a diagonal.
I know. See what it looks like.
Yay.
But yeah. Does that make sense?
And for example, I think if we change this to something like 50, it should look okay, yeah. So this is basically like one way you would do it. There are a lot of different ways of doing this. In this particular example, Jen used a group element initially, which is like, I consider always appending a group element to be a good practice because then it's easy to add any transforms. Now let's take a look at using something called a selection.join. In the new D3, this enter, exit, and update cycle is replaced by a single join function, which really makes it easy to do all of this stuff. But right now I won't go into those scenarios, but you will reach a point in your code where you can't use a join because it doesn't allow you to customize it. So just now, since we are on a simpler example, let's take a look. What we'll do is we'll try to build a really not to scale model of our solar system. So first I defined some basic styles which I'm going to be using later. So I have my solar system background set here, my orbit set here. I'll explain why we have these values. And this is our basic data set. So we have an array of all the different planets plus the sun. Well, Pluto arguably may or may not be a planet, so we'll consider it a planet for now. Then I have some helper functions here which like get radial x and get radial y. I'll explain them when we finally use them, but they are just there for some basic mathematics calculations. So this is what we will try to achieve. This is what your final outlook. So let's start with a blank scale. So right now I just have a SVG with a height and width of 900. Then I have a rectangle here with the same height because if I remove this statement, I just am left with a blank screen. So
Can you just set the background color?
to the SVG,
Yeah.
well, it's always good to have a rectangle which I can select and manipulate later. You can set a background color, but a rectangle is something you operate like it's a selectable element I can have. So right, I just added this rectangle. It has a class called solar system background, and I specified in this the fill for this class. So I just like this is what our background is right now. Then we start like here we start our code. I will comment most of our code so that we can see step by step what's happening. So first, when I run this code and I run our JavaScript, we just get. I should When I run it first, nothing happens because what we are doing at this point is we are just selecting the SVG with the ID solar system, which is basically our SVG which shows this big rectangle. The next step we do is we have our data, and if we take a look at our data, we realize our data is, except for sun, it is actually sorted in order of each planet's distance from the sun. So here, like still to make sure that everything is sorted, I just do a solar system dot sort, and I provide the custom sorting function. So this function basically says compare two planets with their distance from the sun property. So it just sorts it in the order from the order according to distance from the sun. So basically, sun is closest to sun, so it is the first element. So what I do is, usually this is not really a good practice to take out part of your data, but here I'm taking out sun and I will represent sun separately because sun has extreme values and it causes distortion if I use it as a part of my selections. So I will just take out sun here as in a separate variable, and here what I'm doing is sorted solar system dot slice 1. So basically I'm saying remove the first element and keep all the other elements in the array. So now this should work. Now we see now our array which we had earlier does not have sun. It just has the planets. So these two lines of code are something I will not explain right away. These are something which Alex will be covering in the next class, but we needed it for this example. So what this basically does is, it basically is a scale which maps certain points to certain other points. So planet size scale is a D3 scale which maps the size of planet. So we see that size of planets are like the size I mean the diameters of planets are on these high ranges. So we just map this higher range to a lower pixel range of 5 to 20. So the smallest planet Mercury is 5 pixels wide and Jupiter is 20 pixels wide now. The reason I did not use sun in this was because sun has a ridiculously large diameter, it just distorts everything.
And you manually put them in there, but there's a way to
Yes,
also
you can always use code to put them in.
Okay.
In actual example, I hope you will use code to put them in. So yeah, like you could take this array, sort it by diameter and take the mean and max or do something like that. But now I just put them in manually. Then here is a distance from the sun scale. It is a scale, but you realize this was a linear scale which just maps 1 to 1. But this is a power scale with exponential 0.1. The reason I did this is distances, the distance from Pluto, distance between Pluto and Sun it's really large compared to distance between like Earth and Sun. Like if I use a linear scale, like Pluto will be somewhere here, Sun would be in the center, and all the other planets would be somewhere in this region. So it just won't look good. So I have this scale. If you'll understand like why the scale work this way much better when Alex goes through this class. Then what I'm doing here is I'm just calculating for each planet. I'm calculating its x and y positions around the sun so that they appear in different place every time. I'm using like a random function here. Like again, when we go through the next class and you learn more about scales, this part of the code will make much more sense. And for every planet, I'm storing its x and y position using this for each loop. So even like when I run this now, we still don't have anything on the screen. So this is where we start writing the code. First, we take our SVG, then we append a group element to it, then give the group a attribute of transform and translate it to 450 by 450. So the reason I do this is, we can see our SVG is of the size 900 by 900. So when I first append the group, by default the origin of the group is this top left because that's what the origin of SVG is. So what I'm saying is append the group and then transform the group to the center. So anything inside the group will have the center of our SVG as its origin. So this is like a really good trick to move your origins around. You like this is something like this you could have used in homework 1 just to move around the origins. So when I do this step, the origin of our, well, not the origin of the SVG, but the origin of the solar system group now is in the center of the screen. The next step I do is circle dot like solar system group dot append circle with the attribute R like at radius of 30, style fill is sun dot color. What I'm doing here is I'm appending the sun separately to the center because it's not part of a list anymore. So when I actually run this code, we just have sun in the center. Next step, now we start appending the planets. So I do solar system group dot select all. Then here, instead of saying select all by circle, I'm just saying select all by a class called planets. Now you could just do this with a circle, but problem is sun is also a circle, so it would select our sun. So I just say select all by a class called planet. Now, right now there is nothing on the screen with a class called planet. So basically everything is part of our intersection. And then we supplied the data, which is our solar system data. Then here, instead of using the complicated enter, exit, update, merge loops, we just say planets.join circle. Then we give it a class of planet because we said that our selections would have a class called planet. Then we give it an attribute like a radius, which we calculate from our scale function, our x and y positions, which we calculated previously, and a color function, which basically each planet has its own different color kind of to show the temperatures. So if I run this, we basically get this. So we have our planets appearing at varying distances around the sun right now. Now, this was an example of join. So what join does is basically join takes all of these steps and it assumes you are doing nothing fancy but exit.remove, enter.append, merge, and it just does that and stops. So basically this join would give you the results of merge selection after removing the exit selections, and then everything else you do is applied to rest of your elements. Now, the problem with this is, for example, in the previous example, the way Jen was trying to do it, if you want to append a circle to a group after your enter selections, you cannot do that here because you don't get access to your enter selections at all. Join just does everything magically. So there is another way to do this. So we still have to render the orbits on the screen. So we will do orbits a bit different way. We will still use a join function. We will still use the join function for orbits, but there is another way to write join, where we kind of can specify or enter, update, and exit functions individually. So in this case, we are saying for all the enter elements, append a circle, give it a class of orbit, and the stroke is basically the color of the radius of the circle, the color of the circumference of the circle, the radius, which is basically how big the orbit should be, and the width of the circumference. So what we do here is the orbit class, basically here we can see orbit class specifies that nothing like the circle shouldn't be filled, we should only see the circumference. So yeah, when I run this part of the code, you see we just have rings instead of entire solid circles. If I did not have this orbit class, and I'll just get a big blank circle. So right now we are at the stage where we have these rings, and then this update loop is, for example, if I add another planet, then the newly added planet will be the part of our enter selection, but rest of our planets would be part of update selection. Exit is any planet we remove becomes part of the exit selection. So let's actually try and remove Pluto. So if we remove Pluto, and just rerun this part of the code, you can see the outer ring kind of disappears. So yeah, this you can go through this part of the code to get a good understanding of how to use joins instead of like a complicated update, exit, and merge cycle. But if you really want to use data visualization, after this class you will have to use enter, update, exit a lot. So just practice that if you can. And do we have time? Yeah, we have time. Can you go through recursion?
Yeah, so is anyone familiar with recursion already?
Yeah.
Yes. Cool. Okay. Thought there'd be more people that are familiar with recursion than with this data. So say what?
Is there any advantage of using this form of join?
Yes. If you're doing nothing really complicated, if you're doing something on lines of what I'm doing in this example, join is the shortest thing. Right? You just have to do a dot join circle, add your attributes, and done. But if you're doing something more complex, and right now we actually haven't learned enough in our classes for me to give the example of what complex looks like. But there are places where you can't use join.
And my question was that using this enter, update, and exit inside join and using them separately.
Yes. So there is a subtle difference. Like here you see enter, update, and exit are the only three things we do. There is no concept of a merge selection. So for example, here we see that stroke and stroke width have been repeated twice. If we had a merge selection, we would only have had to do it once for the merge selection. Here we are repeating our code. But yeah, like again, it has its places. This is much easier to remove than merge. So it's like your decision. Do you want to spend time learning how merge works, or do you want to just copy your code twice? Any questions? I think
Okay, so for homework, it'll be helpful to use recursion. And so we were going to go over it just to get everyone on the same page. If you're not familiar with recursion, there is, I'm not sure if you guys, who hasn't looked at homework to you? Cool, okay, so you probably know where. You have an idea. Anyway, so recursion, for those of you that are not familiar with it, a recursive function is a function that calls itself. This is an example of tail recursion, but basically, general anatomy of a recursive function is that you have a base case, or basically a termination condition that is checked every time the function is called to keep you from going into this recursive hell forever. So you can break out of the function. So basically what we're doing here is we're going to make a simple countdown function. So we have, and I just made an array because I could not figure out in observable how to just console log or whatever. So we're given an initial value. For example, we're using 10. So what we want to do is we want to count down from 10. So basically, when we initialize this with 10, we give it as a second parameter an empty array. So in the beginning, what we're doing is we're pushing that initial value before we check with our base case if we want to run the function again. So we're pushing 10 into our keeper array, and then we're using our base case. Okay, so if our value is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to return our array. If not, then we're just going to call the function again, and we're going to decrement this value -1, and then we're passing our array that we passed to the initial call to the function, and we're going to call it again. And so what are we doing? We're going to end up with an array that's 10, that has 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That makes sense. And then you can obviously complicate this, or you can adjust it to have it do different things, but the end goal is being able to get into nested data and pull stuff out. If you have children in your data, it's a good use case for that. So does that make sense for everyone? Okay, cool. I'm just gonna change this. So this is here in a slightly more complicated example. And we're making a Fibonacci sequence. So it would be best if I should run this to better understand what's going on.
Should I just go through it?
Okay. I wish there was a way that it could like animate how it's executed.
Yeah. So like Fibonacci sequence is basically a series of numbers, right, except for the first two numbers. And each number is a sum of previous two. So except for 1 and 1, like 2 is sum of 1 and 1, 3 is sum of 2 and 1, and so on. So like you can write a for loop to print this, but it's a bit more fun with recursion. So in this recursive function, the first thing the function basically takes in two arguments, n, which is how many Fibonacci numbers do you want, and a sequence, which is like an empty array which we keep for collecting our Fibonacci numbers. So the first statement checks if our sequence, what is the length of our array. So how many numbers we have collected till now. If the length is equal to n, which was our input, we just say, yeah, that's it, that's our answer, return the sequence. If the length is 0 or the length is 1, which is basically we either have no numbers or we have one number, we just add 1 to our sequence, because first two numbers should always be 1 in the Fibonacci sequence, so we just add 1. Otherwise, what we do is we say sequence.push length -1 and length -2, which is basically just add the last two numbers of the series, and whatever the sum of this last two numbers is, add it to our sequence. And then we call the Fibonacci sequence again with the same parameters, n and sequence, and this goes on till the length of our array becomes equal to n. So if you do this in like a regular JavaScript file and add a console.log, you will see each number being printed on a new line and how it really works. Yep. So yeah, like that's pretty much it for today's lab. If you have any questions, we have office hours tomorrow, or you can just ask us on Slack.
So about